did our first gigs without a name. We were just the band that were playing in the corner of the room when the party was going on. And we had a set of criteria that we wanted for a name. We wanted it to, well, sound good was the most important thing. Hopefully it had a bit of rhythm to it, or even alliteration.
And then we saw the horse racing one day, and there was a horse called the Archduke, and we got speaking about Archduke Franz Ferdinand and the importance he played, and then thought, hey, that's a name we could use.
That sounds good, that name, Franz Ferdinand. You can say it and it's quite fun to say it, which is really what a name should be. It's that simple. If it's fun to say the name, then it's probably a good name, so that's why we stuck with it.
In rock music, as in life, one can never underestimate the role of chance. Ideas, talent, perseverance and ambition are certainly desirable, and at least some combination of these qualities would seem to be a necessary requirement for success. But luck and timing also play their part, and their importance could arguably be considered much greater than any of the previously mentioned virtues. Elvis Presley emerged just as America was looking for a young white sex symbol who could sing and play the increasingly popular race music, soon to be known as rock and roll. The Beatles gave the same country something to smile about in the wake of the assassination of President Kennedy. And what did the Sex Pistols do but capture the national mood of mid-70s Britain, with their howls of frustrated rage and bitter disappointment? Throughout history, seemingly isolated events come together in such a way as to trigger a chain reaction that in retrospect seems inevitable. Perhaps musicians, more than anyone else, appreciate the significance of timing, of harmony and dissonance, of the right notes in the right places and the spaces in between, of the pose struck at just the opportune moment and the juxtaposition of a hairstyle and a chorus, the words sung but in such a way and the music saying something completely other behind it. The simple things, you see, are all complicated, as someone once sang. Franz Ferdinand would surely agree. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand was born in 1863 and was originally third in line to the Austrian throne. This changed when his first cousin, and the Emperor's son, Crown Prince Rudolf, killed himself and his 16-year-old mistress in 1889, and when his father, Archduke Charles Louis, died in 1896. Franz Ferdinand was now the heir apparent to the Habsburg throne, and was considered to be somewhat more flexible and liberal-minded than his uncle, the reigning Emperor Franz Joseph. Among his reformist notions was his intention to give the Slavs an equal say in the running of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, alongside the Magyars and the Germans. An idea that was in direct conflict with those of the Serbian nationalists of the time. And it was one of these, a young man by the name of Gavrilo Princip, who would assassinate the Archduke and his wife in Sarajevo on the 28th of June 1914, thus triggering events that would lead directly to the beginning of the First World War. The Archduke was once described as the loneliest man in Vienna, shunned by society due to his complete lack of charm and elegance. It's hard to imagine anyone more different from the four-piece Glasgow rock band who, within a year of their inception, had record companies clamouring to sign them, and who within another 12 months had fans and critics alike swooning at their immaculate pop hooks, witty turns of phrase and innate sense of style. Yet the band also feel an essential empathy with life's underdogs and outsiders, and their hearts must have leapt to learn that this charmless man, their namesake, also enjoyed what has been called one of the world's great love affairs. His marriage to Countess Sophia, Duchess of Honenberg in 1900, was forbidden by the Emperor, who considered the Duchess a commoner, and in going ahead against his wishes, the couple were forced to renounce all rights of rank and succession for their children. The Countess was not even allowed to ride in the same car as her husband during affairs of state, and yet she was by his side when the fatal shots were fired, dying first, still carrying their unborn child. The date was their 14th wedding anniversary. In this tale of doomed romantic love, of individuals caught up in occurrences beyond their control, there is surely more of the soul of Franz Ferdinand, the band, than in the version that casts the Archduke as merely a hapless pawn whose death triggered 4 years of senseless bloodshed, murder, suffering and destruction on an unprecedented scale. The band have said that they are interested in the pivotal events in history, the crucial moments when everything changes, for better or for worse. For them, so far, the timing has been perfect. Their music has captured something that was waiting, suspended in the air, while their lyrics have crystallised the unspoken thoughts of a generation of sensitive, literate teenagers, daydreamers and pop kids who have just been waiting for a band like Franz Ferdinand that they could call their own. And an older generation of critics, journalists and others still in love with what pop music can mean have been waiting even longer for a group like Franz Ferdinand to come along. Those who remember the initial impact of Pulp, Suede, The Smiths or even Roxy Music, bands that meant something, but who never forgot to give you a catchy melody and a beat you could dance to. Charming, romantic and daring to be different, daring to dream and to reach out and to change other people's lives. Franz Ferdinand know all about luck and timing. They also know how to learn from history and the importance of a good name. Perhaps through them the name of Franz Ferdinand can be redeemed, no longer associated with a war that the Archduke really had no part in, but with a pop group who provided a thrilling, glamorous soundtrack to the early years of the 21st century. Here's hoping.
We met up in Glasgow at a party at an art show. I met Alex and Bob there, and Paul came along later on to some practices, and then we just got going on songs. And our first show was in May last year, I think.
The Franz Ferdinand story really begins at Glasgow School of Art, somewhere around the turn of this century. Not all 4 members of the band were students there, nor was the college the place where they all first met, but the artistic, creative and social scene around the city's art school does seem to have been crucial to the band's beginnings and their subsequent development. Born to a Greek father and an English mother, Alex Kapranos spent his early childhood in Greece. But by the time he came to Glasgow to study English literature at the city's university, he had begun using his mother's maiden name of Huntley. Like most kids, he wanted more than anything else to fit in, and on moving back to his mother's native Sunderland from Greece, he didn't particularly want a surname that marked him out to strangers as different. Fearful of prejudice and violence, he only reverted back to Kapranos in 2001, around about the time that Franz Ferdinand were getting started. Before devoting himself wholly to pop stardom, Alex had worked as a welder, a van driver, and as a teacher of English and information technology to asylum seekers, an occupation he found particularly worthwhile and was sorry to leave, as he met some incredible people who had been through some horrendous experiences just to have the basics of life that he had always taken for granted. Upon arriving in Glasgow, Alex wasted no time in immersing and involving himself in the city's always fertile music scene. During the late 1990s, he worked behind the bar of the legendary rock venue come hangout The 13th Note, and also began promoting gigs himself, running 2 clubs a week at the Kazoo Club and the 99p Club. Mogwai were one of the many Scottish acts who he helped in making their first steps along the road to success. And like everyone else, Alex played in bands himself, most notably as the singer and guitarist in the Blisters, who later changed their name to the Corellia and made one album, 1997's Divorce at High Noon. The sharp-suited quartet were heavily influenced by cult 80s band The Monochrome Set, 1920s jazz and pre-war French balladeers, and as such didn't exactly set the charts alight. Nevertheless, some connection to the Franz Ferdinand sound to come can be detected, not least in Alex's lyrics, which already flirt with the arch wordplay he would later hone to a fine point. Following the demise of the Corellia, Alex played bass in the final lineup of Glasgow scene stalwarts and John Peel favourites the Yummy Fur. This band made several records, none of which really met with the success they deserved. But by the time Alex joined them in 1998, they had already released their last slab of collectible vinyl and sadly split for good the following year. At this time, the Yummy Fur was also home to drummer Paul Thompson, who had been with them since 1997 and featured on several singles. A native Glaswegian, Paul supplemented his meagre rock and roll earnings by DJing at the Vic Bar and working as a life model at, yes, the Glasgow School of Art. His face, and indeed other parts of his anatomy, was therefore well known on the local scene, and he would later claim the dubious distinction of having been painted in the nude by all of his future bandmates' girlfriends. Bob Hardy came to the Glasgow School of Art from Bradford in Yorkshire in order to study painting. While mastering his brushwork, he also spent a certain amount of time in the 13th Note Cafe, which was how he got to know Alex. Apparently, for the first couple of years, Alex hated Bob, as he'd heard him telling some jokes about dead babies that he thought were in very poor taste. Nevertheless, by 2001 they were friends, and Alex was seriously plotting a new band. He'd been given a bass guitar by his friend Mick Cook, a member of cult Glaswegian popsters Belle and Sebastian, on the condition that he did something useful with it. Alex asked Bob if he wanted to play it. Bob had no intention of becoming a professional musician. He was a painter, an artist. He was, however, a big pop fan, and it was the music scene that had drawn him to Glasgow in the first place, particularly, in fact, the records of Belle and Sebastian. So Bob didn't need too much convincing to take up the bass, although he still considers himself a painter first and a musician second. The main point, though, is self-expression, in whatever medium you choose. Guitars, like paintbrushes, are just tools, and the important thing is to have something to say. While Bob began learning the intricate mysteries of the bass guitar, the pair actively began seeking out further recruits and ran into Nick McCarthy at an art school party. Apparently Nick was dressed like a young Adamant and was stealing Alex's vodka. Violence seemed imminent, until Alex asked Nick whether he could play the drums. Presumably just to escape a beating, Nick lied and said that he could. In fact, Nick was a classically trained pianist and double bass player who had grown up in Germany and trained at the Munich Conservatory. He'd moved to Glasgow because friends in Munich had said it was a fun place to be, and he had heard that it was the European city of culture. Unfortunately, that was in 1990, and Nick had arrived 11 years too late, with no contacts, no money, and no job. Nick was born in Blackpool, but grew up in Rosenheim, Bavaria, apparently the drug death capital of Germany. He had previously been a teenage joyrider, unable to resist the fact that nobody in Germany seemed to lock their car doors, and had rejoiced in the nickname of Nick McCarthy, despite claiming that he always brought them back. He also once broke into a supermarket with friends, clearing the shelves of booze before fleeing. Though no drummer, he had played bass in a German jazz band called Embryo and had come to Glasgow just a few months previously, desperate to find people to play music with. He was in luck.
The idea of like having a guitar band or a rock band that would make people dance as well, that was really important to us.
You go to a gig and you stand and watch. Why couldn't you go to a gig and also dance like you would at a nightclub or something?
The fledgling band began rehearsing round at Nick's place, and it soon became apparent that Nick couldn't really drum. Or, as the group's press release would later have it, he could hit the drums, but not in any particularly coherent order. This didn't really matter, however. What mattered was that Nick shared Bob and Alex's vision, and that he and Alex found that they could write songs together. As word got out that Alex, Bob and Nick were planning a new band together, Paul Thompson began dropping round Nick's place to hang around at rehearsals. Since the demise of the Yummy Fur, Paul had sold his drum kit, but quite fancied playing guitar in the new band. For a while they practiced in this arrangement with a painter on bass, a classically trained pianist and bass player on drums, and the best drummer in Glasgow on guitar, until common sense to some extent prevailed, and Nick and Paul swapped over. Paul agreed to play drums on the condition that he could still sing and that he didn't have to use rack toms, as they stopped the audience getting a good view of him. With Alex Kapranos on guitar and vocals, Nick McCarthy on guitar, keyboards and vocals, Bob Hardy on bass and Paul Thompson on drums and vocals, the lineup was settled. All they needed now was a name. This arrived one afternoon while the band were watching the racing on telly. The appearance of a horse called Archduke led to a discussion about famous archdukes in history. Only one could immediately be recalled: Franz Ferdinand. From the beginning, before they had a name and had even written or played a note, Franz Ferdinand had a clear idea of what sort of band they wanted to be. It was a vision, a manifesto of sorts that encompassed the look, the sound, and the attitude of the group. Certainly instigated by Alex, it took shape during long discussions with Bob in his kitchen, and later in various bars, cafes, gigs and clubs with Nick and Paul. It's an idea summed up in what has already become a much over-quoted phrase: making music that girls can dance to. Following the demise of the commercially successful Britpop explosion of the mid-90s, the alternative and independent music community seemed, as a whole, to turn its back on the idea of tunes you could whistle, songs you could dance to, words that you could understand and appreciate and sing along with. The trend was to go back to the experimental, underground and obscure, with Glasgow's own Mogwai the most popular exponents of the post-rock genre. Not that popularity was the object, indeed it seemed that the more arty and inaccessible you were, the better. Ordinary people weren't supposed to like you. You certainly didn't want to get into the charts or appear on top of the pops, where you might actually have some effect on people's lives. Post-rock heroes were American underground collectives like Slint and Tortoise, and the music was largely confined to 20-minute drones, gloomy single-chord odysseys that eventually exploded into self-indulgent tantrums of raging antisocial noise. Franz Ferdinand deliberately set out to go against all of this. They wanted to write catchy 3-minute pop songs that were at once accessible and intelligent, that could be literate and ambiguous or direct and emotional as required, and that weren't afraid of being popular. They wanted to bring melodies, words and rhythm back to centre stage, and they wanted to look good too. In an echo of the days when the likes of David Bowie and Roxy Music reacted against the dull, dressed-down hippie meanderings of progressive rock with the beginnings of glam, so Franz Ferdinand contrived and manufactured themselves into something glorious in defiance of the prevailing underground orthodoxy. Unlike many of their indie rock peers, and perhaps because of their art school backgrounds, Franz Ferdinand understand the importance of image. Just don't call them arty though, they hate that. It's not like we got a band together as some kind of conceptual abstract sound sculpture, Alex will say. We got together to make a pop band. Deliberate contrivance and pretension are never far from the surface though. It's hard to imagine Westlife making a statement like, it had to be something big, on the level of Field Marshal Haig's tears that fell as he counted the statistics of the men that had been sent over the top. Yet that line also sums up the scale of the band's ambitions, and their desire to move people emotionally as well, of course, as physically. As Bob says, there's nothing finer than seeing people dance to your songs. Franz Ferdinand's other motto is, where's the fun in that? A question they ask themselves in every stage of the writing, recording and performing process. It's an easy rule to live by, they claim, and they're disappointed that more bands don't abide by it. Listening to lengthy guitar solos, no fun. Doing vocal takes for the 450th time, no fun. Making a song girls can dance to? Fun! Otherwise, as they say, what's the point? As it happened, they weren't alone in these thoughts. While Franz Ferdinand was still busy inventing themselves, the tide of fashion turned against the post-rock movement and in favour of short, snappy pop songs again. At first, the new bands all seemed to come from America. The Strokes, the White Stripes, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Britain soon offered up the Libertines in response, who seesawed gloriously between brilliance and self-destruction, but something else was needed. Meanwhile, another wave of new bands appeared on the horizon, again mostly American, who drew on the post-punk taut white funk sound of the early 80s. Bands like Radio 4, The Rapture and Hot Hot Heat. Name-checking Public Image Limited, Gang of Four, Joy Division and Talking Heads was suddenly de rigueur, but as yet none of these bands had the melodic nous to really cross over into the top 40. Franz Ferdinand's time had surely come.
We went around looking for a building. We wanted a building that we could muck about in, basically, somewhere that we could have to rehearse in, to record in, to have parties in, to throw gigs in. So Nick and I went wandering around the city, and we found this old Art Deco warehouse. We found the landlord and came to an arrangement with him that if we fixed it up, plumbed it in and put in some electricity, then he'd let us use it for free.
Franz Ferdinand's first gig happened not through their own instigation, but through friends of theirs who had heard of the band and their ideas. Once again, it was the Glasgow School of Art that was to blame. A group of female students were organising a single-sex exhibition called Girl Art and asked Franz Ferdinand to come along and play music that they could dance to. So, on the 22nd of May 2002, Franz Ferdinand played their inaugural live show in the artist Celia Hempton's bedroom, in the same house where Alex and Nick had first met over that disputed bottle of vodka mere months before. 80 people squeezed into the neon-lit flat above a Chinese takeaway to watch the boys perform a set consisting of 4 songs: Take Me Out, Auf Axe, then still called Truck Stop, Michael and Shopping for Blood. They ran through the set twice. Most people danced. Encouraged by this success, Franz Ferdinand repeated the home-based gig idea a month later, holding a party at Nick's place and playing in his front room. But it was becoming apparent that they were going to need somewhere bigger and less residential to rehearse, and began scouring the city for suitable premises. They soon found a place that exceeded their wildest expectations, a huge abandoned Art Deco warehouse overlooking the River Clyde in Glasgow's once notorious Gorbals district. After tracking down the landlord and convincing him to give them the keys to the 6th floor, they christened their new home the Chateau and moved in. Once they had evicted the pigeons, the band managed to find a sympathetic electrician who could wire the place up so that they could tap into the national grid without anyone noticing. The Chateau was an ideal rehearsal space, but it also had the potential to be so much more. Inspired by the example of Andy Warhol's factory, the Chateau soon became an unofficial multimedia art space where local artists could exhibit and create installations while bands played on the other floors around them. Public events including art, music, film, poetry and performance soon followed. We were socialising with these people and they all had ideas and they all wanted to do their work in the same way as we wanted to play, Alex later told Time magazine, adding that it seemed like the most obvious thing in the world to get art people together. One soon-to-be legendary event was a sports and leisure night, which took advantage of the piles of sports equipment still stored in the warehouse. Rowing machines were strapped to trolleys and raced across the floor. A rifle range was set up in which shots were fired from the saddle of a rocking horse, and Franz Ferdinand played lit by banks of randomly flickering sunbeds. The last event at the original Chateau happened on the 6th of December 2002. On this occasion, Franz Ferdinand played alongside fellow local bands Uncle John and Whitelock, Park Attack and Scatter. while an art exhibition took place on the lower floors. By this time, word of mouth had spread to such an extent that an estimated 500 people had turned up. Unfortunately, so did the police. At first, there were only a couple of them, and they seemed terrified by the scale of the event. Accordingly, they called in reinforcements. As 2 van loads of coppers charged up one staircase, artists, musicians and several crates of booze hurried down another, like a scene from a speakeasy in Prohibition-era Chicago. Perhaps the police mixed Alex Kapranos up with Al Capone, or perhaps it was the fact that he was the only person who stayed to face the music. But the singer was arrested and charged with running an illegal bar, and with contravening assorted fire regulations, health and safety rules and noise abatement laws. Down at the cells, the police told Alex that they'd been trying to find out where the noise had been coming from for the last month. The charges against Alex were eventually dropped, but Franz Ferdinand needed to find somewhere else to play. By this time, they were also playing more conventional shows around the Glasgow club and bar scene, as well as the Flourish nights that another artist, Lucy Mackenzie, held at her studios. It was Nick who first stumbled across what was to become the band's new home, an old Victorian courtroom and jail on Glasgow's Tobago Street that had been abandoned for over 30 years. It was ideal not only because it was located in a run-down neighbourhood where they were much less likely to be busted by the police, but also because they would be breaking the law in such an imposing monument to Scottish legal authority and civic control. The Tobago Street jail became the new chateau, as Franz Ferdinand liberated the prisons and the places of judgment from their own past, and ushered them into a future of unlimited possibilities. They would practice in cell number 6. It was perfect.
We moved to the place that we use at the moment, which is a rundown jail in the east end of the city. In fact, it was the whole sort of like centre of the East End Glasgow legal system. There was a courtroom, a jail, police station and a morgue, so you could get arrested, tried, jailed and hanged all in the same building.
Having negotiated a lease with the Tobago Street jail's landlord, who also happened to be one of the hardest men in Glasgow, Franz Ferdinand moved in. Despite being in the heart of the red light district and next door to a scrapyard where junkies regularly congregated to score, the former Bridgeton CID headquarters was actually one of the safest places in Glasgow, thanks in no small part to Harry, the aforementioned landlord. It's Harry who can be seen in the video for Darts of Pleasure, supposedly punching Alex in the face. While the original chateau remained a venue for art installations, events and exhibitions, Franz made the second chateau their home and hosted its inaugural happening on the 15th of January 2003. While art installations filled the cells, Franz Ferdinand presided over the courtroom, bringing chaotic swamp blues merchants, the country teasers up from London, to headline, while they acted as support. The night was another huge success, and once again the police arrived, but this time they gave them 4 warnings before eventually shutting the power down, and Franz Ferdinand lived to play another day. The band had by this time recorded a 4-song demo that they'd intended to release on the tiny local indie label Shadows. Before this could happen, however, the tape had got into the hands of their friend Todd, of London garage rock band The Beatings, who had been playing it to various music biz types in the capital. As a result, the gig at the new chateau included several faces from London, eager to check out the band who had recorded the startling tape. The band were convinced that this already had the potential to be a lot bigger than a single on a small local label, and with Todd's help they arranged their first gigs in the capital. On the 26th and 27th of February 2003, Franz Ferdinand played 2 small London dates alongside a band called The Rebel, with an industry buzz already surrounding them. At a subsequent Glasgow show, over 40 record company representatives travelled up to see them. and the band found themselves wined, dined and wooed by all manner of people, some of them interesting and passionate, others jaded and cynical. They returned for another London gig at the Monarch in Camden on the 7th of May, supporting the Futureheads and Lomax, and on the 6th of June they formally signed to Domino Records, the self-styled last great independent, and home to such credible, if not exactly huge selling artists as Stephen Malkmus, Smog, Broadcast and Sebado. Franz Ferdinand signed to Domino because they liked the label, liked the bands they had and the way they did business. Most of all, they liked the label boss Lawrence Bell, who rather than take them to a fancy restaurant, cooked them dinner at his own flat. He was happy to let them develop at their own pace and to give them the artistic freedom they needed, although even at this stage Franz Ferdinand were aware that their ambitions were perhaps rather more mainstream than those of their label mates. You know, it's really pop music, they are rumoured to have whispered to Bell just before they signed. He didn't seem to mind.
Well, we've been playing quite a lot recently. We've been doing this tour with Bell and Sebastian. Just before that, we went on tour with Hot Heat and the Fiery Furnaces. So exciting! But the last few months have been pretty intense. It's been amazing for us. I think we slept in our own beds about 3 times over the last 3 months.
The summer of 2003 saw a smattering of live gigs from Franz Ferdinand, while they concerned themselves mainly with recording their debut album. A show at Glasgow's Barrowland supporting the Libertines was followed by slots at Tea in the Park and the Reading and Leeds festivals, plus 3 dates supporting Hot Heat and 4 supporting Interpol. In between, they spent 3 weeks in Malmö in Sweden, recording with Cardigans producer Tor Johansson. The band had met Tor in London while they were looking for a producer and got on with him immediately. They shared the same sense of humour and taste in music and felt that he knew what he was talking about. Malmö in the summer was a beautiful seaside town, and Tor lent the band bicycles for the duration so that they could go cycling every day. Unfortunately, after the party held to celebrate the completion of the album, Bob drunkenly dared Alex to throw his in the canal as they were cycling back to the studio in the early hours. An equally drunk Alex took him up on it, then realised he'd have to walk all the way back to the studio, and so stripped off and dived into the freezing canal to rescue his hastily disposed of bike. He succeeded, but scraped his skin on something in the filthy waters and found himself with a huge purple infection on his leg for the next 3 weeks, as well as a flu-like lurgy. On the 8th of September, Franz Ferdinand released their debut single, Darts of Pleasure. By this time, the buzz around them was already reaching such proportions that to many a disinterested party, it seemed like hype, as the music press fell over themselves in the rush to declare it the greatest thing since sliced bread. It reached number 44 on the singles charts, a respectable placing for a previously unknown band on a small independent label. Nobody at this stage really cared about chart placings anyway. What mattered was the quality, how the band looked and came across, and what they had to say. Housed in a simple yet strikingly elegant sleeve inspired by the Bauhaus movement and Russian constructivist art, Darts of Pleasure was an arch-danceable pop song with a loose swagger in its stride, not heard since the glory days of early Suede. Alex's languid croon murmurs sweet nothings over scratchy neo-punk guitars, driven forward by Paul's classic hissing hi-hat disco beat. The verse and chorus play with light and shade before exploding into an organ-assisted climax, complete with cries of Ich heiss super fantastique, a hymn to the seductive power of words. It dreams of being overwhelmed by passion, yet remains grittily earthbound thanks to the jerky rawness of the guitars and the insistently flat production. The flip side, Shopping for Blood, is at least the equal of the lead track, a bilious rant against the new Scottish gentry, with their anglicised vowels and sub-London thoughts, delivered in a style reminiscent of The Fall fronted by Edwyn Collins. It's a tantalising hint of a bitter political anger in Franz Ferdinand that has yet to be borne out in any of their subsequent releases. The CD and 12-inch also included a third track, Van Tango, while the American CD, released on the 18th of November, added demo versions of Darts of Pleasure and the then unreleased Tell Her Tonight. On the 10th of September, Franz Ferdinand promoted the single with a packed headline show at London's ICA, following that with dates in Sheffield, Oxford, Liverpool, Glasgow and Berlin, before embarking on a brief co-headlining tour of the UK with the Ludes throughout the first half of October. The 24th of that month saw Franz Ferdinand performing at an event held to mark the 10th anniversary of Domino Records at the Electro Works in London, which was billed as being presented by Franz Ferdinand, The Chateau and Eat Your Own Ears. The band performed live and DJ'd on the occasion, which also featured art and video installations reminiscent of their by now legendary Glasgow happenings. Pink Grease, I Love Lucy, Block Party and Joy Zipper also played live, while DJs included Ladytron and Stuart Braithwaite of Mogwai. There was no let-up in the band's live schedule, as only a couple of days later they set out on an 11-date UK tour, opening once again for Hot Hot Heat, a jaunt that included a live Radio 1 showcase event at Brighton's Concord. They then nipped over to Europe for 5 dates and North America for 3 consecutive New York shows, playing alongside rough trade signings The Fiery Furnaces. After 3 headlining shows in Dundee, Edinburgh and Aberdeen, the band headed down south once again, this time supporting their old friends Belle and Sebastian on a 6-date UK tour in December. Franz Ferdinand finished an amazing 2003 with a show in Spain at Barcelona's Razzmatazz on the 18th of December. Well, almost ended. The band were nearly booked to perform as part of Glasgow's open-air New Year Eve celebrations. They ended up playing to around 50 people in a friend's flat. It had been an amazing, insane year, but it would be nothing compared to what 2004 was to bring.
To me, like, it's the coolest program. It's brilliant. Like, it's just it's so live and it's got a brilliant. And it convinced my mum that it was for real as well. Like the band, like oh, I've been on the telly. That's okay.
Franz Ferdinand's second single, Take Me Out, was released on the 12th of January 2004. Traditionally a quiet period for record releases following the Christmas madness, it is always a good time for new bands to grab some much needed attention. In January, every music paper is looking around for new faces, who it can proclaim to be the band to watch in whatever new year it happens to be. And while December's novelty records slide slowly down the charts, nobody much in the real world can be bothered with buying new singles or albums, nor can the major record companies be bothered releasing them. So the field, more or less, is left wide open for the little labels to showcase their wares, and for those who buy them to actually influence the makeup of the charts with their specialised tastes. All of which goes some way towards explaining the phenomenal success of Take Me Out. But it doesn't go nearly far enough. Take Me Out went straight into the UK singles charts at number 3. Suddenly, the band were no longer just critical music press darlings. They were serious pop contenders as well. They had been thrust from the world of cottage industry record labels, curious, intelligent interviews with the broadsheets, and the knowing, self-contained and self-referential world of the specialised music press, into the wider and scarier world of smash hits, The Sun, primetime telly and daytime Radio 1. It was a world where subtlety is often lost, where wit and irony are often willfully misunderstood, and where intelligence and sensitivity are usually steamrolled by the crass and obvious. If Franz Ferdinand was serious about their ambitions to leave behind the comfortable indie ghetto and take on the pop mainstream, they now had what they wanted in spades. Having already appeared on Later with Jules Holland in November, by mid-January they were performing Take Me Out live on CD UK in front of an audience of bemused 12-year-olds, expecting the latest product from Pop Idol or Fame Academy. A week later they repeated the trick on Top of the Pops. In-store appearances at Virgin Megastores and HMVs were crammed with both the expected indie kids and ordinary pop fans, who a week or so ago hadn't a clue who the band were. Suddenly, all the papers wanted to know whose shirts they wore, and their faces were everywhere. In terms of gigs, 2004 began for Franz Ferdinand with the NME Brats Tour, an annual jaunt around the country every January and February, with 4 new bands that the weekly music paper considered were most worthy of your attention. Booked sometime earlier, Franz Ferdinand were relegated at the bottom of the bill, below the marginally more well-known, well, during the previous autumn anyway, Rapture, Von Bondies and Funeral for a Friend. The tour started at Northumbria University on the 25th of January and 10 days later wound up at London's Brixton Academy on February the 7th. Less than a year after their first London pub gig, Franz Ferdinand were playing at the city's biggest and most prestigious indoor venue. On that last night, the band joined headliners the Von Bondies on stage for a climactic rendition of the song It Came From Japan, with Bob skillfully managing not to spill any of the glass of wine he brought from backstage, whilst sharing backing vocals and a microphone with the Von Bondies' Marcy. Meanwhile, Take Me Out was everywhere. Only the day before the Brixton gig, Franz Ferdinand had appeared on Joe Wiley's Live Lounge on Daytime Radio 1 to perform acoustic versions of Take Me Out and the pulp song Misshapes. A 12-inch version of the song was storming the clubs, and the lyrics of the original were causing great debate as to their meaning everywhere from the NME to the Guardian, both of whom brought in professors of linguistics to analyse it. Alex claims that he was just playing with the ambiguity of the phrase Take Me Out, and with the idea of 2 people who wanted to ask each other out, or be asked out, but didn't know how. Take Me Out can also be interpreted as Kill Me, and in this ambiguity lies the crux of the song. I'm just a crosshair, just a shot away from you, just a shot, then we can die. I know I won't be leaving here with you. Much of the song's success is accidental. Opening with a trebly riff and half-sneered vocal that sounds like a parody of last year's darlings The Strokes, it stops dead after just 1 minute and changes into a completely different song, based around a 4-to-the-floor funk rhythm, as if to say, that was then, this is now. If the main verse struts around like Wild Cherries Play That Funky Music White Boy, then the chorus recalls quirky Scottish new romantic duo The Associates, with its descending disco riff supporting an ascending vocal line, giving the whole a giddy, weightless feel. The track is backed on the CD by All For You, Sophia, a direct reference to their namesake, the Archduke and his wife, and their joint assassination by Gavrilo Principe over another synth-driven pseudo-new romantic dance floor groove, culminating in military drum rolls for good measure. The third song is Words So Leisured, an acoustic swooning re-rendering of Darts of Pleasure, as a wee small hours ballad with more world-weary lyrics, the empty morning after with all fantastic passion spent. The 7-inch coupled Take Me Out with a radio session version of Alf Axe, here titled Truck Stop, and a DVD single, was also released, featuring the eye-catching Take Me Out video, directed by Jonas Odell and inspired by photo montage, Dadaism and Busby Berkeley. Not bad for a song originally written on a Casio keyboard for a laugh. But such sudden and unexpected success automatically brings whispers of one-hit wonders. It was with their album that Franz Ferdinand would really have to prove themselves.
About a year ago we wrote it. We wrote it in the living room of the flat that Nick and I used to share. No, we just sat down and we had this chord progression, and we were mucking about with one of those, those little Casio keyboards you get as well, and we had the banjo accompaniment on it. It was kind of going ding 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 ding, and we were mucking about like trying to play along with it on the guitar. We couldn't quite get it right. We kind of go, this is brilliant. It sounds great, like this banjo sound.
Franz Ferdinand, the LP, was released on the 9th of February 2004, just a couple of days after the NME tour concluded, and was immediately hailed as the debut album of the year. It certainly displayed a self-confident swagger that belied the band's collective youth. From its low-key introduction, the album's opening track, Jacqueline, shifts gear after the first verse into a driving, new wavy anthem to doing things for the sake of being alive, rather than for the balance in your bank. The Jacqueline of the title is a friend of the band who works in a poetry library, and who was chatted up by an older, well-known poet. A description of the look on his face when she turned him down inspired the first verse. The second is about another friend, Gregor, who was attacked by thugs one night while drunk, and later claimed that as they were giving him a kicking, he felt so alive that he didn't care what happened to him. He was mysteriously rescued when a car pulled up and was bundled into the boot away from the trouble. To this day, he believes he was saved by angels. The two parts are linked together by the sing-along chorus of "It's always better on holiday," and the payoff line, "But for chips and freedom, I could die." With a chanted verse over a spindly guitar riff reminiscent of post-punk oddballs like the Mekons or Gang of Four, Tell Her Tonight is a straightforward depiction of the frustrations of unrequited love or lust, with a simple melodic chorus worthy of the Kinks. Crucially, it doesn't outstay its welcome either, and within a couple of minutes we're straight into Take Me Out. The Dark of the Matinee follows, a strange choice for the album's third single, as it's one of the least immediately catchy songs on board. Its sophisticated structure and introspective lyrics recall Pulp, while the chorus takes several listens before the true greatness of its almost folk-like melody sinks in. There's something of a garage rock ABBA feel to the song too, as Alex sings of a surreptitious love affair between two escapist dreamers who find sanctuary from school and office in the dark of an afternoon cinema show. There they imagine the lives they could have when they finally make it, and Terry Wogan, a reference quite specific to British people of a certain age, is asking them how it all feels. There's more ABBA echoes on the keyboard-driven Alf Axe, which also has the uplifting melancholy feel of The Cure when they were making classic early 80s disco pop singles like The Walk and Let's Go to Bed, later disowned by singer Robert Smith as being too commercial. Another rumination on unrequited love, its driving bass line and one-finger synth riffs, also recall B-Movie's great forgotten 1982 single, Nowhere Girl. The title, by the way, means on the axle and comes from a German TV show from Nick's childhood. The disc continues with the glorious adrenaline rush of Cheating on You. Like a less polished Strokes duking it out with early Squeeze, its cynical refrain of You Know It's Only Love seems at odds with the life-affirming spirit of the rest of the album, until you realise that the song is about ending a relationship when the good has gone, rather than hanging on to something that's obviously dead just because you're too scared to make the break. The brooding situationist funk of This Fire milks the maximum amount of drama from a taut, minimal, repetitive riff before careering directly into a revisited dance of pleasure. Michael weds a blatantly homoerotic lyric to a jerky, insistent rhythm as Alex sings of watching a boy on the dance floor dancing like a beautiful dance whore and seriously wanting him. It's possibly the only example of an openly gay love song written and sung by a straight man, and the music has the same physical gut-wrenching pull as sudden unexpected lust, making you want to instantly leap up and strike the most inappropriate of poses. It ends, as perhaps these things must, with a cough. Come On Home is another chugging disco two-step with a whistling synth riff over Marshall drums that recalls 80s one-hit wonders Kissing the Pink and their song The Last Film I Ever Saw. Alex's not entirely successful falsetto also owes something to band mentors Bell and Sebastian. Finally, 40 Feet brings our night in the mutant dance hall to a close, a slow-burning epic with a lyric that deals metaphorically with standing on the edge of a potentially life-changing decision. While not the album of staggering originality that some hastily claimed it to be, Franz Ferdinand does the best that any modern pop album can do, which is to make use of influences that have lain neglected and unused for some time, rearranging them in new forms and making them seem fresh and exciting again. The Strokes, Radio 4, Hot Hot Heat and Interpol are all mining the same era, but Franz Ferdinand dig deeper and offer a uniquely British perspective. Plus, they make lyrics seem important again, and much as the Smiths or Pulp did, create their own world which adds up to more than the sum of their influences. A world where the outsiders, the marginalised and the dispossessed are all welcome.
I think that's something that's been important to us all along with the band. I like bands that you can hum their tunes to. I think it's really important to us. And when we started off as a band, it's something that we really wanted to do. We didn't want to be smart-arsey about it and like sort of say, oh, our music is too intelligent for you to understand because you're just thick, you're the average listener. No, I think you should go away from a gig or go away from listening to a song on the radio and have the song in your head. Not because you hate it, but because, yeah, it makes you feel good.
Initial limited edition copies of the Franz Ferdinand CD also came with a bonus disc recorded live at the Amsterdam Paradiso on the 7th of November 2003. During the band's brief European tour with the Fiery Furnaces, who are thanked during the concert. The recording fades in halfway through Cheating on You, before going into Jacqueline, titled Better on Holiday on the sleeve, Tell Her Tonight, Shopping for Blood and Take Me Out, with an extended one-note intro. An otherwise unreleased song is introduced as Love and Destroy, but is referred to on the sleeve as Margarita. With its references to meeting at midnight under the Muscovite sky, this mid-paced teardrop explodes like groover seems to be inspired by Mikhail Bulgakov's novel The Master and the Margarita, which was also the starting point for the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil. Alf Axe appears as Truck Stop, and This Fire, Michael and Darts of Pleasure finish off the set. Around the same time, this recording also appeared unannounced in certain record shops as a supposed bootleg vinyl LP, which, official or not, gained the band some extra column inches in the press and made the live set available to vinyl-only fetishists who were on the ball enough to seek it out. Meanwhile, the album proper raced to the top of the charts, and bolstered by almost unanimous rave reviews, its success confirmed that Take Me Out was no one-off fluke. The band were now proper pop stars who had gone seemingly overnight from ignored outsiders to being the prodigal sons that everyone wanted a piece of. Their time was no longer their own, and it was with some regret that they found that they could no longer meet and talk to everyone who wanted to get to know them. Franz Ferdinand were quick to deny any charges that they had sold out, however, or that their success was in some way the result of hype. They had never gone out of their way to get noticed or signed. The music business had come to them rather than vice versa. Yes, they had always set out to make music that was popular with a broad, uncomplicated appeal as well as a literate, experimental edge. But since when was that a crime? As they've stated time and time again, they always wanted people to like them and never wanted to be just hip, arty and obscure. So many bands are afraid of getting to the heart of what their songs are trying to say, Bob has said. God forbid they should write a chorus, and brave is the person seen to be enjoying themselves at any of their gigs. What's the point? As to their sudden success, Alex told London radio station XFM, I think popular music should come from the outside and take over. That's the problem at the moment. People think that pop music has to be manufactured by these huge corporations. It doesn't. It should come from people's bedrooms, from the ideas of real people. That's what I'd like to see happening again. a democratic socialist pop manifesto calling for the people to take back the charts for themselves? A return to the glory days of the early 80s when bands like the Teardrop Explodes, the Specials, Soft Cell and Dexy's Midnight Runners were genuinely popular as well as credible and groundbreaking? Franz Ferdinand are setting their sights high indeed. More power to them.
It's part of the feeling that if you've made the decision to actually go on the stage, or you've made the decision to perform, you should do it properly and actually perform. I suppose when you go on stage as well, it's almost like you are meeting a challenge. It is quite an exhilarating, exciting thing.
While their debut album was topping the charts back home in the UK, Franz Ferdinand were elsewhere, making their first sustained assault upon the USA and Canada. On the surface, the band may seem to be one of the least likely candidates to break America, with typically British pop characteristics such as understatement, irony, arch cleverness and ambiguity, sexual or otherwise, generally coming pretty low down the list of what most Americans want from a rock band. For one thing, America hasn't really had a market for guitar-based pop for several decades now. If it isn't hip-hop, soul or R&B, then it's heartfelt singer-songwriter schmaltz, anodyne country and western, drive time AOR, new metal or alternative college rock. Received wisdom has it that what Americans want from their rock music is sweat, passion, grit and uncomplicated anthems to feeling good or feeling bad. When they do take to British bands, it's the likes of U2 or Coldplay who picked up the baton that Radiohead dropped when they got too arty for US tastes. But hang on, the last real British invasion to dent the American charts was in the new romantic era of the early 80s, when bands like Duran Duran, A Flock of Seagulls, The Psychedelic Furs and Echo and the Bunnymen all enjoyed phenomenal American success, with their daft haircuts, tinny synth sounds, arch lyrics, eyeliner and posing. And to some extent this is the very era that Franz Ferdinand are referencing, combining it with the garage earthiness of bands like The Strokes. And as films such as Donnie Darko see the synth-driven early 80s back in vogue in the States, perhaps Franz Ferdinand could be the British band most likely to do it after all. The March issue of Time magazine put it best when it said that Franz Ferdinand sounded like a band that every American would surely hate, pretentious, arty and prone to name-checking Andy Warhol and Dadaism. However, the writer then wrote, "My dream of America finding unity in its scorn for these avant-garde turkeys lasted until the moment I heard their music." It turns out Franz Ferdinand play easily accessible, radio-friendly pop, and play it with more humour and joy than anyone else on the market. The band's repeated insistence that they hate elitism and love pop music also calmed an American press usually fearful of pretentious limey art rockers. On the other hand, there's always the Anglophile contingent who love British bands for exactly those reasons. So how can Franz Ferdinand lose? Interviewed by almost every major US entertainment magazine, they remained polite and courteous throughout, especially when asked what they thought of the country they were visiting. Unlike previous Brits abroad, Oasis, whose attitude and arrogance turned many Americans off. Following an unprecedented record label bidding war, the band signed a deal with Epic Records, reportedly worth £1.5 million. Franz already seemed like the hippest of downtown scenes, one American fan told the NME, after an incredible sold-out show at New York's Bowery Ballroom. But once the crowd realised that only the super connected would be granted admission, it became the place to be. Everyone wanted in. It felt as if the city's most famous rock stars, who'd helped construct the rock and roll barometer of cool, for which New York is so famous, are ghosts of an old scene. And Franz Ferdinand are architects of a new ideal. That barometer of cool is about to shoot through the roof. Franz Ferdinand's future looks super fantastic.
Thank you for buying Maximum Franz Ferdinand. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.